Fate. Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 8 to 10. Chapter 8. Better Kind of Saint. My class is ruler. My true name is Jeanne d'Arc. Jean smiled at them, however said smile quickly vanished in the face of the immediate reactions. Mash stood protectively in front of Ritska while every other servant leveled their weapons at her. Wait. Jean threw up her hands in a placating manner at the servants surrounding her. I'm not the dragon witch and I don't mean you any harm. Master. Mash turned to Ristuka with a questioning look. Said Master looked pensive for a few moments before nodding at Jean. All right. We'll trust you for now. At his words the other servants lowered their weapons but still remained on guard around her. I thought you were supposed to be dead. Mash interjected, although no one could see behind their helmets. Both Sigward and Ash narrowed their eyes at the woman. Jean shifted awkwardly before looking at the fort and then back to the servants. This isn't something we should discuss in front of them. Follow me. Astolfo let out a dramatic sigh before bursting into a wide grin. Dodged a bullet there. I saw Ruler in action during my Grail war. Would hate to fight her. Huh. Ritska and Mash turned to Astolfo with wide eyes. What was that about a Grail war? I remember Ruler from my Grail war. She was pretty strong too. I see. Jean nodded, still slightly lost. I'm afraid I don't remember you, or any Grail war. Really? Astolfo pouted. That's too bad, we could have caught up, oh well. Yo, I hate to break up the little gathering. See you said before gesturing away, but weren't we supposed to talk about our weird situation? Of course. Jean nodded, please follow me. The figure in dark steel armor grunted as he decapitated another wyvern. To his left Giorgio similarly dealt with the lizard he was facing. Looking around, the tall knight in dark silver armor nodded his head before turning back to his companion. His red cape fluttered slightly in the wind. It seems we have dealt with the drakes. His voice sounded relatively young, although given the helmet concealed his face and his height of nearly 2 meters it was impossible to tell. Indeed. Georgios nodded. This road should be a town up ahead. With luck we can offer aid to those within and get a better idea of what's happening here. From what you have spoken of, an outbreak of drakes is uncommon here. The history provided by the Grail speaks of no burnings of France, and dragons and their smaller cousins had long since departed from the land at this point. Gerogios frowned. I suspect this relates to our summoning, as well as the information we received in passing. You are still hesitant to suspect that a saint could consort with these beasts. Georgios nodded. Until we gain the full story from the locals, I shall remain skeptical. Jeanne d'Arc's nobility and pious nature are well known even in the throne. To believe she could suddenly turn into a murderer. The large knight shook his head at the rider and sheathed his sword. Whether or not this saint is indeed a butcher of the masses is irrelevant for the moment. The drakes threaten the innocent here, and I could not call myself a knight of Anorlando if I were to ignore the threat posed by them. Georgios smiled and nodded his head. I am lucky to have found a like-minded traveling companion. I am equally fortunate to find a man who recognizes honor and loyalty. Now come. We have a journey to continue. This seems like a good place to settle down. Jean nodded to herself in the slight clearing of trees. The Chaldea group followed her into a nearby forest. Please, before we begin, may I hear your names? Mash blinked before turning to Ritska. At his nod she then turned back to Jean. Understood. My individual name is Mash Kyrilite. She then pointed at Ritska, and this is Fujimaru Ritska, my master. Yo, Lancer. See you Chilane. See you spoke up when looks fell upon him. Rider, Astolfo. Nice to meet you. The pink-haired boy grinned and waved. Sigward of Katarina. Saber servant. The onion-shaped knight introduced himself in a jovial tone. Ash. Servant. Saber. The final servant introduced himself with a small nod as he placed a few sticks in the center of a makeshift campfire. A master. Jean looked slightly surprised as she studied Ritska. So there are masters in this Holy Grail war. And with so many servants, she frowned. Oh, no, I'm just a demi-servant, not like the others. She pointed to the rest of the group. For being related to the Holy Grail war, we weren't really summoned for that. Demi-servant, not a true heroic spirit. Have you heard of us before? Jean shook her head. I'm afraid not. I suppose we should clear up this confusion. That might be best. Ritska nodded and gave her a small smile. Like I said, I am a servant and my class is ruler. Jean fidgeted slightly, but much of the information that should have been provided by the Grail is missing. That seems unusual. Ritska frowned. Jean nodded her head at him before her expression became more troubled. It is worse than that. My stats have been ranked down and I have lost my anti-servant command seals. I asked for your names because I can no longer discern a servant's true identity. Fortunately, France is my homeland. I can still speak the language to the locals. I see. Ritska nodded. Those soldiers earlier, they said that Jean was a dragon witch. I only materialized a few hours ago. Jean sighed. I'm afraid I'm very much in the dark in regards to the whole situation. It seems there is another Jeanne d'Arc in this world who murdered King Charles VII and has been slaughtering Orleans. Two of the same servants. Mash shook her head and frowned. Has anything like this happened before, Doctor? Roman hummed. If we could access the Holy Grail war records, there should be examples of simultaneous summons. He sighed. However, one thing is for sure. With Charles VII dead and Orleans occupied, this represents the collapse of the nation of France. At least we have discovered the problem. Sigurd nodded to himself as he sat down. Ash placed a few more sticks in the makeshift campfire and activated a small pyromancy to light it. I just heard a voice there. Was that Magecraft? Jean looked around in confusion. What are you all? Oh right. We didn't properly introduce ourselves, did we? Roman chuckled to himself. Nice to meet you, Saint Jeanne d'Arc. As soon as he said that, both Sigurd and Ash broke out into coughing fits which attracted the attention of everyone else in the group. Ash-san. Sigurd-san. What's wrong? Mash looked on in confusion and slight worry as the servants began to compose themselves. Sorry. You said she was a saint. Ash said slowly before looking Jean up and down. You haven't eaten people before, have you? What? Jean recoiled as if struck. Everyone else fixed Ash with a rather peculiar look. I have not. That's good. Ash and Sigurd nodded. At the very least you are better than the last saint I met. You raised an eyebrow. What kind of weird saints you got running around where you are from? Right. Romani awkwardly coughed. As I was saying, my name is Romani Archaman, but everyone calls me Roman. I see. Roman, you sound like you tend to be a dreamer. Jean smiled and nodded her head. What is this sense of defeat? She complimented me, but I felt insulted. Excuse me, Mademoiselle Jean. Mash spoke up and gestured to the other servants. We're here to correct this twisted history. We belong to an organization called Chaldea. As Mash and Ritska were explaining the situation to Jean, Astolfo and Cu walked up to the other two servants sitting round the fire. So, you guys had some cannibal saint? Cu spoke up, a slightly raised eyebrow. There's a story behind that, like that Hovel guy. Saint Aldrich of the Deep. Ash spoke, his voice somber. I first heard of him when I spoke to a fellow unkindled by the name of Hawkwood. He told me that Aldrich was a cleric once, however he developed an unfortunate habit of devouring men. He consumed so many that his very body became distorted. He wasn't so much a man as he was an all-consuming living sludge. That's pretty disgusting. Astolfo grimaced and shuddered. Indeed. The church had him sealed away in the Cathedral of the Deep. However, with the fading of the flame they required a champion to link the fire. Aldrich himself was not yet strong enough to do so, therefore roads were set up, all of which led to the cathedral. Sacrifices were made available. They fed people to this guy. Cu's face scrunched up in disgust. They fed a great number to him. I encountered a pair of his former sacrifices who had escaped him. Ash waved his hand. That is beside the point. Like all those sealed away in the cathedral, Aldrich was wrong, for lack of a better word, yet despite this he still held great influence over the minds of men and especially those who guarded him. The deacons fell to the deep and proclaimed Aldrich a saint. Regardless, Aldrich was made a lord of cinder for his might rather than virtue. That's pretty disgusting. It gets worse. By the time Okay guys. Ritska inadvertently interrupted Ash as he walked over to the group. We've explained everything to Jean and she's agreed to help up. What's wrong? Damn it. You interrupted story time. Astolfo whined and crossed his arms. Ritska appeared taken aback and turned to Cu, only to see the servant shaking his head. Saber here was telling us the tale about that cannibal saint. Oh, my bad. Ritska scratched the back of his head. Anyway, our objective is to deal with the dragon witch Jean and restore this timeline. Right. The servants nodded before turning to each other. So who's taking the first watch? The large figure waltzed through the halls, the nearby wyverns seemed to perk up as he walked past them, as if they were greeting their parents. The large man opened up the doors leading into the main chamber. Within were two figures. A pale woman in black armor and a sickly large-eyed man in blue robes. Jean Alter turned to see who had entered before returning her attention to Giles and dismissed him. You summoned for me. The nameless king crossed his arms. I trust it was important. Yeah, sure. Jalter lazily waved him off. The dragon slayer. What about him? You deal with him. I sent you, Vlad and Carmilla, to kill him and then sack the city of Lyon. Ryder raised an eyebrow and scoffed. You summoned me here for a simple report. Jalter turned a glare on him. Don't take that tone with me. I tolerate you because you are useful. You forget who holds the command seals here. The nameless king remained silent, cueing Jalter to continue. Now then. Did you sack Lyon? Yes. The dragon slayer can no longer protect the city. However, there have been circumstances. Jalter frowned. What kind of circumstances? The drakes I dispatched to the east have not yet returned. More importantly, the few refugees captured from the south have spoken of protectors. A pair of men in strange armor who effortlessly slay wyverns. Jalter clicked her tongue and turned away. Stray servants. It seems likely. Which direction are the servants to the south heading? North. If the testimony of the refugees before their death is to be believed. I'm sending you east. The disappearance of the wyverns could be related to an as of yet unknown force or more stray servants we don't know about. I'll gather the others and join you shortly. If it's more servants, then await my arrival. Fine. Ryder grunted and turned away and swiftly left the room. His thoughts were cast back to the Battle of Lyon. That dragon-slaying servant, he was a worthy foe. I should have asked for his name. Perhaps when we fight again I will do so. He shook his head. He originally pledged his allegiance to the woman in hopes of fighting a war worth his time. Indiscriminate slaughter in the name of revenge was a great motivator to band an entire country against them. Whether or not they would win would be irrelevant. It was the act of the war itself he would enjoy. Yet he was left disappointed. The only foe he had encountered who was worth his time was the dragon slayer protecting Lyon, who had forced him to engage the man without the use of his mount. He frowned. They had overwhelmed him with sheer numbers. An ill-suited fate for a warrior of his caliber. Regardless, he knew the wounds he inflicted on him were not a guaranteed kill. If this dragon slayer survived, he would face him again, and he would face him alone. Storm. Ryder called out as soon as he left the castle. His large dragon companion manifested itself. Ryder placed his hand on the beast's head and patted it a few times. Come, we are heading east. The dragon growled at him and Ryder let out a small chuckle. Yes. I'm sure we will find more foes worthy of us eventually. He climbed atop his mount. The king of the storm released a loud roar as it and its rider took to the skies and headed east. The other wyverns surrounding the castle quickly flew away from their larger cousin. The battle ended when Anri plunged her sword through the wicked dastard's head. She gave me her thanks and departed. Ash finished as he recounted the tale of Aldrich to the servants gathered round the campfire. I didn't know your home was that. Mash began only to pause as she searched for the right words. Crazy. Ritska offered. Both Ash and Sigward chuckled at him. That would be an accurate assessment of Lothric. Ash nodded his head. There is no end to abominations and foul things. Jean appeared more disgusted by the tale. To think that a saint could do such things. You have already proven to be his better, Lady Jean. Sigward spoke to her in a friendly tone, similar to how a parent would praise a child. The fact you are disgusted with his actions and are so readily willing to save the very people who killed you is why you are more deserving of the title of saint. Well, Jean blushed slightly and shook her head. I never really viewed myself as a saint though. Few often view themselves as what they are. Sigward's tone became sadder. His helmet turned away from her and began looking off into the distance. My friend was hailed as a king by his people, but he never viewed himself as one. He never really wanted the title, but when it was forced upon him he took it without regret. So rarely are we granted titles that we ourselves want. You are just as much a saint as he was a king. Regardless of how you both feel about it. He chuckled slightly. In my heart though, I know that you are as deserving of the title of saint as he was of king. What was your friend like? Mash asked Sigward with a slightly raised eyebrow. Yorm. I knew him for a long time. We met on our travels together. He was always getting into all sorts of trouble. As was expected of a giant, I suppose. The Onion Knight released a small laugh as he saw the others widen their eyes. A giant, Ristuka exclaimed. Yorm was a giant. Oh yes. Sigward nodded. Quite big for his kind too. He wielded a large machete in his right hand and a great shield in his left. He was always one for adventures but never did learn the knack for saying no to people. Sigward's tone turned softer. Whenever someone would make a request of him he'd go out of his way to aid them. He chuckled. I asked him about it one. He said, I'm a giant, Sigward. If they are willing to come to me for aid, who am I to turn them down? What did being a giant have to do with it? Jean asked with a curious tone. Giants were shunned. Sigward's tone turned harsher, often referred to as simply dumb beasts which would destroy towns. Yorm was nothing like that, and people knew it. They took advantage of him. He knew it but didn't care. As long as he could help these people he was happy. You said he was a king. Oh yes. Sigward nodded his head. The profaned capital, or as was referred to back then the city of Goldborn, was without a king to lead it. Centuries ago they had been conquered by a giant. The people of the city asked Yorm to lead them, as he was a descendant of the original subjugator. He never even hesitated in accepting the role. We both knew he didn't want it. However they asked him, they needed his aid and he would answer. He sounds like a good person. Mash nodded to herself. Sigward joined in her appreciation. He was a good friend, he sighed, but he didn't deserve to be their king. He remained silent for a few moments after that. Sigward-san, Mash asked worriedly as to how the knight had stopped speaking and merely stared into the fire. It's getting late. He turned his head and stared up at the sky and the moon hanging over them. While we servants don't need to sleep, I suspect both you and Master are getting tired. You should get some rest. Sleep deprivation does terrible things for your skin. Both Mash and Ritska exchanged worried glances before they turned away and rested on the ground near the fire, doing their best to get comfortable on the forest floor. Sir Sigward, Jean spoke up, her voice tinged with concern, are you all right? The Onion Knight turned his head to her and nodded. Oh, I'm fine milady. He waved her off, just reminiscing. The pair turned to see Astolfo on the floor in a rather messy sleeping position while snoring loudly. They both chuckled at the display. Perhaps we should take after our young friend here, Lady Jean. I suspect a nice sleep will do us both some good. Ash remained silent as he sat in front of the campfire, while Lancer stood off staring into the woods. You're not gonna take a nap with them. CU gestured to the majority of the group currently sleeping around the camp. Ash shook his head. I never could get into the habit of sleeping. Just felt like a waste of time. Besides, even before becoming a servant, we unkindled never really needed to sleep to begin with. CU looked at him before sending a pointed look at the snoring knight in onion-shaped armor. Seems to come pretty naturally to him, though. Ash released a small chuckle. Indeed it does. Sigward always did have that little habit of sleeping in strange places. You ever met Yorm? That, Ash released a sigh before turning to look at Sigward's sleeping body. Is not my story to tell. CU nodded. I see. Won't ask about it. It seems like the big guy was really affected by it. Ash didn't reply, merely nodded his head. Rise and shine. Ash shouted out at the people still sleeping. There were a few groans from Mash and Ritska, but the servants simply jumped to their feet as if nothing happened. I believe that is the expression, is it not? Ash-san. Mash yawned and blinked a few times. What time is it? Sunrise. The servant replied. We'd best be ready for our journey. Sigward woke early and made breakfast. Really? Rituska stretched as he looked at the pot on the smoldering campfire with a mysterious liquid bubbling in it. Where did we get the pot and the bowls? The fort. You mean the one full of wounded soldiers? Ritska raised an eyebrow, his voice lined with clear disapproval. You stole cooking supplies from wounded soldiers. Just their spare pots. Sigward chimed in as he stirred. I asked them when I noticed some of them just lying around. They had no problem giving me some after I saved their lives. Ritska gave an initial sigh of relief that they weren't resorting to banditry before he chuckled at the comment. At least you asked, what are you making? Estes soup. Ash replied. Many blinked as his voice took a more excited tone to it, or at least as excited as the saber had actually been able to manage thus far. I've never heard of that. Mash tilted her head in confusion, before sending Sigward an inquisitive glance. Is it from your homeland? Oh yes. Sigward nodded enthusiastically. It's an undead's favorite food. Where did you get the ingredients? Ah. Sigward shook his hand. A chef never reveals his trade. He took out a bowl and poured some soup into it before handing it to Mash. Try some. Thank you. Mash nodded and smiled before taking a small spoonful to her mouth. She blinked a few times as she tasted it before replying, "It's warm." She then frowned as she stared at it. "It's weird, senpai. It doesn't have a taste, but it makes me feel warm inside." Indeed. Sigward nodded as he distributed more bowls, a refreshing warmth for the dullness of Lothric. That is why it is everyone's favorite. As everyone took some, it finally came time for Ash and Sigward to take their bowls. Sigward gripped his large helmet before taking it off and revealing his face. He was a middle-aged Caucasian man. He had short hair atop his head which was slightly graying, large bushy eyebrows and a rather thick mustache. What surprised most though, were his vibrant blue eyes which seemed to shine as well as a rounded face. My. Sigward chuckled to himself as he set his helmet down. Been some time since I took that off, forgot how stuffy it was. Ash shook his head before he removed his helmet. Unlike Sigward, Ash was far younger, likely only a few years older than Ritska. He had messy dark blonde hair which extended just past his ears and emerald-colored eyes. There were a few scars on his cheeks and one went along his eyebrow. Ash-san, Mash stuttered. The servant turned to her and raised an eyebrow. "You're young." "Really?" Ash blinked. "I've never actually seen my reflection before." He chuckled to himself. "I wouldn't really know. But you sounded older." Ritsuka was equally stumped by the sudden revelation. "Probably the helmet." Ash shrugged as he took in a mouthful of his soup. "Eat, master. We've got a long road ahead of us." "Right." Jean nodded as she swallowed a spoonful. "We'll cut through this forest and head into Orleans. From there we'll take the roads and gather information from the towns and forts which haven't been attacked yet." "Where's the nearest town?" Ritsuka asked as he took in another mouthful. "La Charite." Jean replied. "It's to the west, but the main road leads right to the town." "Cool." Astolfo nodded. "Can we get souvenirs while we're there?" The group made brisk pace through the countryside heading west for La Charite, occasionally stopping for breaks to allow Ritsuka to rest his legs before continuing on. They had been traveling for a good few hours. "We should almost be there." Jean spoke to the group from the front. Mash and Ritsuka jogged up to walk next to her. "If we can't get any information here, we'll have to move further inland." She frowned. "But I'd rather not do that. We're unaware of the strength of the enemy and I'd rather not risk a direct confrontation." "You're really cautious, aren't you?" Ritsuka offered with a small and rather sad smile. Jean winced and shook her head. "No, I'm actually panicking quite a bit right now." She sighed. "The other, me, can't be in her right mind. What that monster will do by controlling the people." Ritsuka placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not you hurting them. You're here with us trying to save them." Before Jean could reply, however, Romani's hologram appeared next to them, his face looking rather frazzled. "Guys, I'm detecting a servant ahead of you. What's worse is that I'm also picking up an ultra-sized lifeform." "A what?" Ash asked as he came to a stop next to the group. "It's a high-class phantasmal beast." Romani replied. "It might even be beyond some servants." "Where was this servant detected?" "Ahead of you. From these readings it's in La Charite right now." The group stilled before Romani stared at something to his left and his eyes went wide. "Hang on." The phantasmal disappeared. The servant is still there but the life form is gone. "That," Mash frowned. "What does that mean? Is it dead?" "Foo. Foo." The small rodent climbed atop Mash's head and began barking in the direction they were heading. "What's wrong, Foo?" Ritsuka asked the animal before turning to look in the direction it was barking. "The town," he exclaimed as he saw smoke beginning to rise in the distance. "It's burning." Jean shouted in horror before breaking into a sprint. "Sorry, kid." Lancer gave Ritsuka an apologetic shrug before slinging the boy over his shoulder. "But we've gotta get there faster than you can run." "Senpai." Mash shouted after the pair as they took off in the same direction. She didn't have long to stare in shock as Sigward raced past her. Both she and Ash exchanged glances before sprinting off after them. "It's no use." Roman's somber voice echoed throughout the ruined town. "There's nothing left." The servants stood around and scowling at the ruin. Jean was looking mortified while Mash was staring in horror at the devastation and occasional burnt corpse. A loud bang alerted the group to a figure stumbling out of a collapsed house. They would have offered assistance if it wasn't painfully obvious that the figure was no longer alive. They've been turned into living dead, Jean gasped in horror as the creature awkwardly stumbled towards them. The corpse got to within a few feet of them before Lancer stuck his spear through what remained of the head rather lazily. The zombie stood up straight for a few moments before going limp and collapsing when Lancer removed the spear. TCH. Lancer scoffed at the corpse, that's unsightly. As they heard more noise, the group looked around to see more corpses stumbling towards them with whatever weapons they could grasp. Let's put these souls to rest. Ritska commanded. The servants nodded, then immediately went to work in dispatching of them. The zombies were of little threat to the servants, being easily killed by the group. Once the last zombie had been slain, they reconvened. Nice work. Ritska nodded to the servants before grimacing. Doctor, can you still read the servant? Yes. Roman replied, his voice panicked, but that's not all I'm reading, you've got wyverns all around the town converging on you. Seconds later, the group turned to see a wyvern perch itself of a house and glare at them. Then another, landed on a separate house. Then another, and another. Eventually the group was surrounded by over a dozen wyverns, each of which had their attention focused solely on the group. Mash jumped in front of Ritska while the group formed a protective circle around him with their weapons drawn. After a few seconds Ritska frowned, why aren't they attacking? Because I have yet to command it. A deep voice echoed out throughout the town. The group turned to see a tall, nearly 8-foot, armored man with a large headdress and woolen scarf covering much of his face march into the center of the town and stare at them. They are loyal creatures. He continued as he walked closer to them. When I was first summoned here I was disappointed. He let out a bitter sigh. It is unbecoming of an individual of my station to be reduced to a simple killer. He came to a stop a few meters from the group, his hands behind his back. His gaze scanned all of them before briefly coming to a stop on Jean. He tilted his head as he looked her up and down, a sibling perhaps. He shook his head. No, perhaps the uncracked reflection of my master. His gaze left her, then came to a stop on Ash. His eyes widened, although the group couldn't see, and he let out a low chuckle. Ha, ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha, which quickly erupted into a boisterous laugh. Marvelous. Perhaps this second life will be worthwhile after all. His arms came to his front and he held one of them out in front of him. Do you remember me, unkindled? Quote. I do. The servant nodded. However, I remember you being taller. HMPH. The man scoffed. Then a large spear manifested itself in his outstretched hand. He gave it a twirl before planting it in the ground. Yes. Seems my true power has been restricted by this class system. You know him, Ash-san? Mash asked without taking her eyes of the new servant. Indeed. Ash replied. Some noticed his voice was anxious. You are one of the servants following the false saint, aren't you? TCH. The man clicked his tongue. Follow. I offered her my aid in exchange for the chance to fight a more worthwhile war. Until this moment I was disappointed. But now that you are here, and these other servants, especially a knight of Katarina, I feel as though my wish has been granted. Why did you destroy this town? Rituska shouted out. The servant blinked before fixing a stare on the master. As the destruction of towns not the way of war. He spoke as if speaking to a child. The death, the ruin. These are all common themes. If one is to fight a true war, it must encompass not just the honorable, but the dishonorable. I however have little interest in participating in the latter, but that does not mean it is any less important. He straightened his posture. The wyverns around the group tensed and looked ready to launch themselves at any moment. I am the servant, Rider. He called out before leveling his spear at the group. I lay a challenge at your feet. Fight and kill me, or die and be forgotten. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 9. The King and the Witch. There was little warning given after the initial challenge was declared. One moment there was a tense silence, and in the next the wyverns and Rider converged on the Chaldeans. The nameless king instantly raced towards the group. At the same time the wyverns descended amongst them. The initial panic to protect their master meant that Rider could take advantage of it. The girl with the shield. Rider thought as he raced towards them. She's the weak link, clearly less experienced and their sole form of defense. He gripped his sword spear with two hands and went for an overhead slice at her. The girl just finished swatting a wyvern away from her master before she turned to the spear racing towards her. She had just enough time to widen her eyes as the spear descended in. There was a loud, pong, sound as the sword spear collided not with the girl's body, but with a bright red spear held out just in front of her being wielded by a man in a tight blue cloth. Impressive, I almost didn't see you move. The nameless king let out a small laugh as he pushed downwards. Lancer grit his teeth as Ryder pushed harder. What's wrong? Lancer smirked. Can't take out a little girl unless her back's turned. Ryder didn't reply to the obvious taunt. You have the mark of divinity on you, yet you are not a god. He mused. A child of one perhaps, let us see if you are worthy of such an honor. Lancer ducked to the side, the sword spear impacted the ground, then lashed forwards with a thrust at Ryder's head. The servant instantly leaned back and tilted his head to the side so the spear sailed past. Ryder narrowed his eyes as he leapt back from Lancer. His speed is not to be underestimated, he is both skilled and experienced, a worthy foe indeed. He inwardly chuckled as he twirled his spear in his hand and narrowed his eyes at Lancer. Come, child of gods. He spoke, let us see if the lords of this land have any strength in their blood. Ha! Lancer let out a bark of laughter, if you insist. Then raced at Ryder. Ash ducked under a tail swipe. As it sailed over his head he lashed out with his left hand and gripped the tail. The wyvern tried to shake him off. With a quick swipe of his sword the tail was separated from the body. The wyvern's scream of pain was cut short when Sigward struck it in the face with a lightning spear before turning around and thrusting his sword through the skull of a wyvern which lunged at him. A dark-colored wyvern latched its claws onto Mash's shield as she defended Ritska. The beast instantly began to flap its wings and carry both the shield and its wielder into the air. Mash! Ritska shouted out. His panic alerted Jean, who instantly turned to see her ally in the grasp of a wyvern. Acting quickly she changed the grip on her standard then threw it like a javelin. It impacted the wyvern's left wing. The creature instantly released Mash and unceremoniously dropped to the ground while screeching in pain. Said screams were halted when Astolfo thrust his sword through the lizard's eye and into its skull, the beast going limp allowing Mash to crawl out from underneath it and for Jean to retrieve her standard. I'm picking up more wyverns closing in on you. Romani shouted out in a panic. His tone got more frantic as he went on, you've also got servants incoming. You need to get out of there, Fujimaru-kun. Mash grunted as she got to her feet and raced over to Ritska. Said master was looking around the chaos with a wild expression, where's Lancer? Oof. His question was answered when moments later, Lancer went skating past them on his heels. He came to a stop and his expression broke into a murderous grin as he continued to maintain his focus on his opponent. You do your bloodline well. Ryder nodded as he advanced. Perhaps the lords of this land are not so feeble after all. He stopped when he noticed that the wyverns were dead and he was now the center of attention for all of the servants. It would appear I am outnumbered, he chuckled. It seems Storm will indeed have his day. The group paused as he said those words. Moments later the air behind him shimmered as a creature came into existence. The group began to back away as a large combination of a dragon and a bird came into existence in front of them. Its four wings began flapping as it let loose a violent roar. The air it kicked up forced Mash to shield her master as some of the dead bodies were blasted away by the winds. That's a dragon. Romani shouted out above the chaos. He's the rider of a dragon. Who even is this guy? A name would do you no good. Ryder spoke as his mount began to calm. That is if there were any who could remember it. We're gonna have to fight this out, master. Lancer remarked. However his smirk was gone and it was clear how his eyes were darting between Ryder and the dragon how serious this had gotten. Ryder raised his hand, ready to command the dragon when another voice rang out amongst the ruins, what did I tell you? Ryder paused and if any were close enough they would have seen his eyebrow twitch in annoyance. I said wait for us to arrive before attacking the servants. An irritated voice rang out. Another figure stepped into the courtyard and was flanked by several others in quick succession. Are you some kind of battle junkie or something? Or are you suicidal? I am more than capable of dealing with them. Ryder remarked, his tone laced with his own irritation. Sure. The woman scoffed. That's why you had to bring out your pet dragon. Ryder gripped his spear tighter but didn't reply. The woman then turned away from him and to the Chaldeans. Now who are the little worms then froze as she got a good look at her opponents, specifically her mirror image. What on earth? Jean, the darkened one, cringed in disgust when she saw her unblemished counterpart Jean, who knew such a thing could even happen. Jean recoiled as she saw her doppelganger. Her skin was paler than her own and her outfit was a darker tone. However, what clearly separated the two was the completely hostile aura which seemed to bleed from her. Her hatred practically radiated off her. Could someone pour some water over me? Jalter smirked and began to let out a maniacal giggle. This is bad. It's actually so awful I fear I may lose it. The woman couldn't contain it anymore and burst out into a venomous laugh while pointing and Jean, it's too funny. Giles, who is this pathetic little country girl? A wimp, a mouse, a worm. The laugh died down and was replaced with a smirk. Truly, only a country like this could cling to this pathetic. Me, comparing them to mice is an insult to vermin. She turned her head back to the servants flanking her. Don't you think so, Gil? Oh right, we didn't bring him along. This performance of yours is grating on my nerves, master. Ryder seethed. If you are going to kill them, do so already. This banter is good for naught but wasting time. Huh. The dark Jean turned to Ryder with a sneer. You mean like how you were just about to kill them? She released a huff of amusement. So arrogant, and you can't even kill a little farmer and her peasant friends. You. Jean's eyes were wide as she listened to her counterpart. Who are you? Jalter turned her attention back to her more noble counterpart. I could ask the same of you. As a leader, I shall introduce myself. I am Jeanne d'Arc, beloved saint of France. That's nonsense. Jean spat. You are no saint, just as I am no saint. Her face shifted into one of anguish. More importantly, why did you order Ryder to attack this town? Huh, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? Jalter raised an eyebrow. Sure as me you must realize the reason. Are you stupid or something? The reason I attacked this town is because I want to destroy France. She smirked. I am a servant. After all, politically and economically it would take too long, so it's just simpler to crush everything in my path. Such foolishness. PFF'd. Such foolishness. Jalter gave a mocking tone as she sneered at her counterpart. The foolish ones were us. What was the point of saving this country? Of saving these people? In the very end they were the very ones who spit on us and betrayed us. That is, Jean seemed at a loss for words. This only signaled Jalter to continue. I will be fooled no longer. She said with a sneer. I will be betrayed no longer. In fact, I no longer hear the voice of the Lord. If I can't hear his voice, it means he no longer blesses this country. So I will burn this country away, in accordance with his grief. That is how I will save this country. I will remake it into a land of death, although, I suppose you could never understand that given that you seem determined to play the saint. If you are quite finished, Ryder grunted and began to advance. He paused when Jalter held up a hand. Are you seriously gonna ignore my instructions for a second time? She venomously spat out at him. Do you really want to die? Is that it? They are here, at our mercy. He spoke again, unaffected by her tone. If you are truly that desperate to end their lives, then stop gloating. TCH. She clicked her tongue. I suppose question time is over anyway. She turned back to Jean. Guess it's time for some pest control. The servants surrounding her immediately tensed and prepared to spring into action. The dragon behind them began to open its mouth. Master. Mash jumped in front of Ristuka. Vive la France. A rather jolly voice called out from the sky. The servants all changed their attention towards the direction of the voice, only to see a glass carriage racing towards them through the air. What in Lord's na? Ryder began, only to be cut off by an immense sound wave directed at them. Jalter and her servants immediately covered their ears, and the dragon shrieked in pain and discomfort while thrashing its head around at the noise. They're attacking the enemy. Ritska blinked, only to turn his head when the carriage landed in front of him. A pale girl with white hair popped her head out of the carriage window and then shouted at the group, "Get in. We're escaping." I'd recommend following her advice, master. Ash shouted as he raced to the carriage, swiftly followed by the other servants who leapt onto it or its horses. Ritska was quick to follow them as he and Mash raced into the compartments. Let's leave, Maria. The pale man shouted to the girl, who instantly responded with an affirmative. What? Jalter shouted in anger as she saw the glass carriage flee into the distance, carrying the servants with it. Ryder remained silent as he turned to storm. The dragon whimpered slightly at the noise before seeking out its master's protection. The nameless king stroked the dragon's beaked mouth as it let out a deep purr. I will refrain from offering my opinion on this development, he said after a few moments. Shut up. Jalter whirled on him in fury. Not another word. Follow them, and this time, don't attack them. Fine. Doctor. Mash said as they left the carriage. It quickly dispelled after everyone was outside. Don't worry. Roman replied. I'm not detecting the servants in your vicinity anymore, well, the enemy servants anyway. Regardless, Ash let out a sigh as he turned to the pair of servants who had aided them. I must thank you for your timely intervention. I very much doubt we could have escaped, and that would have been without the god we were fighting. Huh. Everyone, save Sigward, blinked at what Ash said, then exchanged looks with each other. Ash-san, Mash began, looking decidedly more nervous. Are you saying Ryder was a divine spirit? Ash turned to her. Is that how you classify gods? He spoke like he knew you. Jean pointed out with a frown. Did you have history with this heroic spirit? Ash shrugged. We actually only met once, sort of. Sort of. The pale girl stepped forwards with a raised eyebrow. Ash turned to her and asked the question that had seemingly been forgotten. My apologies, it seems we have forgotten our introductions. Oh, yes. She straightened herself out and did a curtsy. My class is Ryder, my true name is Marie Antoinette. Amadeus Wolfgang Mozart, the tall thin man, did a small bow. Class is Castor. I'm more of a musician. All right. Mash nodded. My name is Mash Kyrillite, my class is Shielder. This is my master. What's up? Ritska awkwardly waved. My, what an interesting greeting. Marie beamed. What's up, my homies? I feel as though I have witnessed something rather embarrassing. Sigward mumbled while scratching his helmet. Anyway, I am Sigward of Katarina. I'm a saber. Ash. I'm a saber. See you, Chilane, Lancer. What's up? I'm Astolfo and I'm a rider. That really is a wicked greeting, isn't it? Jeanne d'Arc. I'm a ruler class servant. Ahem. Roman coughed. Saber, can we return to what you were saying about Ryder? Ah, yes. Ash nodded his head. He was a god of war. Doctor. Mash turned to the hologram. Is the summoning of divine spirits even possible? Roman released a sigh and massaged his head. With the Chaldea system. No, it's practically nigh impossible to summon a divine spirit. Riduska raised his hand. What's the difference between a divine spirit and a heroic spirit? Oh, right. A divine spirit exists as a higher being than elementals. Whether or not they exist in our world is hard to tell. It would probably be simpler to think of them as gods, like Saber described. Oh, we're fighting a god. Riduska paled, while Ash nodded. Fighting a god with a dragon mount, mind you. Lancer pointed out with a scowl. That guy wasn't a pushover in combat either. He was slower than I was, but was definitely more experienced. Unsurprising. Ash said with a sigh. He was likely around since before the Age of Fire, which would be an uncountable millennium, and given his status as a god of war, he would have devoted his life to conflict. Jean finished with a frown. What do you know about him, Ash? Nothing. Jean blinked at the servant's reply. But there must be something you can tell us. Right now, you know as much about him as I do. If he was a god of war, Ash-san, why wouldn't anyone where you're from know about him? Mash asked with a curious expression. Ash shrugged. No idea, perhaps his name was struck from history. All I knew when I traveled to Archdragon Peak was that it had something to do with dragons. Turns out they were all dead save a rather large wyvern and the Nameless King. Nameless King? Amadeus quizzed with a raised eyebrow. That is Ryder's. Well, that was what he was known as there. More of a title than a name. How did you meet? Astolfo asked with an excited tone. Was he one of your weird companions like Sigward here? I rang the bell of challenge. He answered. We fought and I killed him. Oh. So you just turn up at his home, call him out, kill him, then leave. Lancer raised an eyebrow. Ash shrugged in response. That is a gross oversimplification of events, but yes. Cu snorted. So, you can kill him again, right? Ritska had a hopeful gleam in his eyes. Probably not. I killed an old man, and if what you say about heroic spirit summoning is true, then he has appeared to us in his prime. It would likely take all of us to kill him. That would be excluding the King of the Storm. That king of what? His dragon mount. Well, what are his capabilities? Romani asked. You fought him, you must know his strengths and weaknesses. His mastery of lightning-based miracles is frightening. He was capable of using the highest level of lightning spears, similar to Sigward's but far more powerful, as well as charging his spear with them. He would often thrust it into the sky, which in turn would cause a bolt of lightning to strike you where you stood unless you avoided it. His strength is obvious given his status as a lord. Ash crossed his arms and sighed. Frankly, he himself doesn't have too many weaknesses I am familiar with. His mount, however, is actually lacking in durability. A few well-placed arrows to its head or lightning-based attacks and it will die. Oh, Romani blinked in surprise. That's something at least. You're close to a ley line. We'll send you some supplies and it may be best if you try a summoning. Nothing against you guys. He frantically pointed to Marie and Amadeus. But we are fighting against a god here. No, that makes perfect sense. Amadeus nodded his head. I'm actually a better artist than a fighter. Besides, I don't really know why I was summoned, given that I don't have a master. Me neither. Marie frowned. I don't really know why I was summoned either. How far are we from the ley line? Ritska asked, while pinching the bridge of his nose. You're actually pretty close to it, about a few hundred meters east of you. Roman replied, I'll have Marcus work on getting those supplies to you. Who is Marcus? He was the chef and is now in charge of logistics. Roman nodded his head, I'll just get him now. Marcus. It's Dr. Romani, I swear to Christ, Roman, if you are calling me about another cake, I will personally come up there and tear out your. The call to Chaldea was promptly cut as Roman went increasingly pale. There was a brief silence before Ritska spoke up. He seems to be on top of things. Let's head to that ley line. The servants have a few nods of affirmation before they began their small journey. So, you're an artist? Ash asked as he walked side by side with Amadeus. You refer to paintings? I'm a musician, Amadeus replied while smiling. Perhaps it's arrogant of me, but I think of myself to be a rather talented one. Is that so? Ash nodded his head. I've never met a practitioner of rhythm before. What? Amadeus turned to him with a somewhat confused expression. Was your homeland culturally dead or something? Yes. How tragic, to live and die without ever hearing the beauty of the music. I will create a song just for you. That's very kind of you to offer. Ash responded with, not actually knowing how he was meant to reply to such a proclamation. You just want to write a new song, don't you? Marie turned back to them with a frown. Maria, are you saying I would use a poor man's ignorance of music just to write myself a new song? Amadeus placed his hand on his heart in mock offense. Yes, that's exactly the kind of thing that a music-obsessed pervert like you would do. The girl replied with a straight face before turning back to her conversation with Jean. She's right, you know. Amadeus turned back to Ash, only to see the servant had fallen back and was now talking with Lancer. Oh. What? Not enjoy your conversation or something? CU asked with a raised eyebrow and a slight smirk. I have never heard music in my life, so this man wants to start creating songs for me. Ash replied and shook his head. His companion also referred to him as a pervert. He then looked around. Where's Sigward? He went up and talked to the little ladies. Think he took Ryder with him. What could they possibly talk about? Hell if I know. I spent several days naked in that well before Ash came and found me. Sigward recounted with a slight chuckle. I didn't even know what happened. I fell asleep then woke up naked. That sucks. How did he get your armor back anyway? Astolfo asked with raised brows. You know, I never asked him. You are a rather interesting fellow, Sir Sigward. Marie giggled. You sound like a bit of an airhead sometimes. Well, he chuckled and scratched his head. Perhaps I'm not always as vigilant as I like to be. More importantly, he turned his head rather abruptly and faced Jean. How are you feeling, child? Jean blinked then fidgeted. I can't understand her. That dragon witch, I can't understand her motives at all. Is revenge not a natural emotion to feel? No, it's. Her face turned wistful. I told you how I never viewed myself as a saint. I shed so much blood when I raised my flag and fought for what I believed in, but even so I don't regret doing it and I don't regret the end. You mean your death? Sigward asked with a titled head. It was only the consequences of my actions that made me a saint, but I don't think that such a title should be given to the dreams of a little farm girl. So, you're not a saint? Marie nodded her head then smiled. In that case, may I call you Jean? Jean blinked then smiled. Why yes, of course. It feels like that would bring back old memories. Wonderful. Marie beamed. Then you can all call me Marie. If you are simply the girl, Jean and not a saint. Then I am simply Marie, and not the queen. You have a real habit of meeting monarchs, don't you, onion guy? Astolfo whispered to the knight. Sigurd was silent for a few moments before he released a mirthless chuckle. I suppose I do, the dead ones anyway. Guys, Riduska shouted out from ahead of them, we're on top of the ley line. We're gonna camp here. I'll collect some firewood then. Sigurd nodded, then headed off into the forest. I'll join you. Jean swiftly followed him. Maybe I can requisition a few tents or something. Ritsuka mumbled to himself, the forest floor is kind of uncomfortable. Mash giggled, I suppose it is, senpai. Are you enjoying 15th century France? Da Vinci spoke with a small smile. She shook her head at the groan Ritsuka sent her way. Thought I'd let you know that the director's soul has been placed in the puppet body. That's a relief. Ristuka smiled and let out a breath. Next to him Mash smiled and placed a hand on her heart. Yep, I'm monitoring her now. With luck she'll be awake either today or tomorrow. She'll probably be a bit out of it, but medical matters are what Romani is for. She nodded her head, then gave the group another small smile. The summoning circle looks good and you've got supplies en route, so maybe we'll talk later. Several boxes appeared before them in a flash of light. One was marked, camping supplies, while another was labeled, provisions. Senpai, should we try to summon another servant? Mash asked. We'll give it a go. Ritsuka nodded as he fed Saint Quartz to the shield to act as a catalyst. Several moments went by until the shield burst to life with light. Ritsuka was left disappointed by the results. He got mainly craft essence. The shield burst to life one final time. When the light cleared, there was a tall man wearing light purple robes and a long thin sword on his back. Servant, assassin. He nodded. My name is Sasaki Kojira. We got more help. Ritsuka turned to see Astolfo punching the air. Yes. Assassin merely chuckled. I assume this is a rather unusual situation. Yeah. Riduska nervously chuckled and scratched the back of his head, then went about explaining the situation to him while Astolfo ran off to tell everyone else about the new arrival. Guys. Ash turned to Astolfo, walking up to them and grinning. Sigurd and Jean stopped placing sticks into the campfire and turned to the pink-haired boy. Master just summoned a new servant. Who did he summon? CU asked with a bored expression. Assassin. He replied while grinning. Terrific. The Lancer shrugged. What's his name? Something Kojira, I think. Astolfo cupped his chin and tapped his foot in thought. Sasaki Kojira. Ash turned to the voice. He saw Ritsuka and Mash coming into the camp while being followed by a man with a thick robe covering him and long blue hair, a somewhat amused smile on his face. I assume you are my fellow servants. He bowed slightly. It is good to make your acquaintance. You up to speed? Lancer asked with a raised eyebrow. Master has informed me of our purpose here. He then raised a lone eyebrow, along with news of fighting a god. Yeah, we're pretty much up shit creek without a paddle. Lancer smirked, then gave Assassin a wave. Welcome to the team. I could think of worse teams to be a part of. A familiar voice cut through the forest, which was precisely the problem considering the Chaldeans recognized whose voice it was. The group turned to see the nameless king standing just on the edge of the clearing, his arms folded in front of his chest. Instantly the group bolted to their feet, dropping whatever they were carrying, and unsheathed their weapons and pointed them at Ryder. The servant merely watched as the group armed themselves, nodding his head to the left. The group turned to see the head of his dragon peering at them from just inside the woods, smoke leaking from its mouth. I was ordered to observe you, or more accurately to avoid fighting you. Ryder spoke again. I assume you realize how simple it would be to end your lives right now. Perhaps the shield bearer could save a few of you, but it is no challenge to kill her while she defends you from storm. Then, why haven't you attacked yet? Ritsuka asked with slightly narrowed eyes. My orders were to avoid fighting you. I was never told I could avoid contact. The servant shrugged. Besides, I felt it necessary to provide you with information. Why? Personal interest, was the vague answer he got. I suspect you aren't here to join our side, are you? Romani awkwardly chuckled. You would be correct, formless voice. Ryder waved him off. However, that is not to say I am not betraying my master in some capacity. What is this information? Jean asked, her expression set in a frown. Ryder looked at her with what amounted to intrigue. You really do look like her. He chuckled. How can the same person be so different? The information. Jean repeated. Several days before I encountered you, I was dispatched to the city of Lyon. Ryder began. Upon my arrival, myself and the other servants encountered a man known as a dragon slayer. We did battle and he was subsequently overwhelmed and killed, is what I told your other half. What do you mean? Mash asked with a confused face, did you not kill him? It is entirely possible that the wounds he suffered did indeed end his life, however I suspect him to be stronger than that, his very nature scared Storm and forced me to engage him in single combat. Ryder tilted his head, if you hope to have any chance of victory, you should travel to Lyon and pray that my intuition into the warrior's durability holds true. You want us to find a dragon slayer to kill your mount? Ash scoffed, do you think we're fools? I would hope that my killer wasn't a fool. Ryder easily replied, but it is not for Storm, it is for my master's dragon. A rather dangerous beast, far greater than my mount. Not quite an everlasting dragon but certainly close enough to kill all of you. Why tell us this? Lancer asked, then narrowed his eyes, what do you gain out of it? A war worth my time. Ryder replied, if I wanted to fight those without a chance of victory I would recluse myself to the countryside and spend my time killing peasants. Aren't you concerned that your master will know of your betrayal? Roman asked, surely she can see everything you are doing via the master-servant link. Careful now. You come dangerously close to insulting me. Human. Ryder remarked, I am more than capable of keeping that witch out of my mind. What will you tell your master? Jean asked, surely she will ask what happened when you encountered us. Ryder turned to her and chuckled, I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, it seems that you escaped further than I could track and all I discovered were the remnants of a campsite, long since abandoned. He turned away from the group, this is a courtesy I will not extend a second time. I have every confidence that you will ultimately lose, he paused as he mounted his dragon. But I had every confidence I could slay a lowly unkindled, perhaps I shall encounter another surprise defeat in this second life. With that the dragon took off into the air, leaving the group alone to their thoughts. He seemed rather intense, Marie pointed out, but to think he was able to just betray his master like that. He would rather betray his master than his nature, Ash pointed out, we should consider ourselves fortunate he at least wants us to defend ourselves before he kills us. Indeed. Amadeus nodded, we now know to travel to Lyon. He turned to Ristuka and grinned, we should probably hurry to Lyon in the morning, right? Yeah. Riduska nodded, then turned to Assassin, like Lancer said, welcome to the team. Certainly a memorable greeting you have given me, Master. Assassin chuckled. Chapter 10. Finding the Slayer. The knight crossed his arms, as best he could with a shield strapped to his left arm, and tilted his head as he stared down at the petite woman with long teal hair and a pale blue kimono. Both himself and Georgios had encountered her during their travels west, in the direction of Montlucan, and sensing another servant they had moved to either engage them and kill them or obtain information. However, when they actually encountered the berserker, both Georgios and the knight were at a loss as to what to do. You, the knight began, his voice taking on a perplexed tone. Claim to be a dragon. He turned his head to Georgios, the latter simply shrugged his shoulders. I am. The small woman muttered in annoyance, I believe I have already explained so, a dozen times, to you. Indeed. My lady. Georgios stepped forwards, my associate and I find ourselves at a loss for information as to the reasoning behind our summoning. We hope that you would have a clearer perspective for us. The woman released a sigh, I am as clueless as the pair of you when it comes to my summoning. I suspect you aren't with the servants currently torching the country however, given that you are speaking to me. Quite right, the knight nodded. A dragon you say, he muttered to himself and shook his head, still confused as to her claim. Regardless, my name is Georgios. Georgios nodded his head in a small bow to the woman. Oh, she tilted her head and fanned herself in amusement, the dragon-slaying saint. Yes. He nodded to himself, I am not a bloodthirsty hunter out for all dragons, if that shall alleviate any concerns you have. I suppose. She hummed then turned to the tall knight expectantly, are you not going to introduce yourself to a maiden? The knight huffed in amusement, I am Archon, captain in the Silver Knights of Anorlando. He gave her a small bow of his head, similar to Georgios. The woman furrowed her brows, I am not familiar with the place. I doubted you would be. The knight nodded his head, will you not extend the same courtesy of an introduction? My, she chuckled, someone is impatient. I am Kiyohime. She bowed, the dragon, She sent an amused look at Archon, who was still confused as to why she claimed to be a dragon. I would offer you to join us, Lady Kiyohime. Georgios smiled. We travel west, to unravel the mystery of our summoning and the reason behind the wyvern attacks. I'm afraid I must reject you. Kiyohime shook her head. I am currently traveling east. Georgios nodded his head. A pity. In that case, I wish you well on your travels, Lady Kiyohime. I as well, hope you find safer roads. Archon nodded, then resumed his walk, Georgios joining him shortly afterwards. After a few minutes of walking, Archon eventually turned back to Georgios. Was she actually a dragon? I suspect you to be more aware of the history of others than I. According to her legend, Georgios nodded, I myself do not fully understand it. The dragon you slew didn't actually look human, did it? No, it was a fearsome lizard. I see. Archon nodded. She was just a bizarre novelty. She said she was a berserker, yes. Indeed she did. She seemed rather sane to me. Georgios' face turned thoughtful for a few moments. She did, didn't she? I suppose we were rather fortunate in that regard. Possibly. Guys, I've got some great information. Ash turned to Marie as she approached the group. They had sent her into town as she would likely be the most inconspicuous of the group. Oh, Kojira turned to her. I assume it relates to our mystery slayer. Yep. Marie nodded, then turned to Ristuka and Jean, the city that Ryder told us about, Lyon. To put it simply, what Ryder says was true. The city was destroyed and the few refugees that escaped have settled here. And news of the foe he faced? Sigward asked, to which Marie nodded. From what the refugees told me he was right, there was a protector of the city. A knight who wielded a large sword and slew wyverns and skeletons. Until Ryder came along, I'm guessing. Cu chimed in with a raised eyebrow, at which Marie's expression became more solemn. Yes, it seems Ryder and a couple others attacked him, they overwhelmed him and he went missing. Lyon fell shortly afterwards. The nameless king does not seem to be one who would issue this challenge to us based on falsehoods. Ash spoke. If he believes that the servant is still alive, then it is likely that he is, therefore we must find him. It seems that Giles de Rais is also marshalling his forces near Lyon. Marie spoke again. Giles. Jean appeared taken aback by the sudden reminder of her old friend. Marie nodded. He has been attempting to take back the city from the monsters who have begun occupying it. Meeting him would be quite difficult. Mash frowned and shook her head. Marie turned to her with a confused expression. Why? Giles is an admirer of Jean's as well, isn't he? If you ask, then surely he would lend a hand. That's precisely the reason I can't. Jean replied. He knows I've become the dragon witch, he'd never accept me like that. I see. Marie nodded. I'm not sure that's quite right, but I understand that you might not want to see him. You're a girl after all. She turned thoughtful for a few moments before continuing. Yes, I agree we don't need to see him. We're in a hurry, after all. I don't think that normal soldiers can handle those monsters in Lyon anyway. Right. Ritska nodded. We'll head to Lyon and clear out the city of monsters while looking for our dragon slayer. Yes. Marie smiled. That's what it means to be a commander. Here's your reward. Faster than he could react, Marie instantly closed the distance between the two and planted a quick kiss on his cheek before pulling away. Well, was it good? Ritska remained frozen before his face turned bright red. Kojira chuckled. My. It seems my young master is quite the ladies' man, as opposed to Cu and Astolfo who were howling with laughter. Ash and Sigward exchanged a quick glance before shaking their heads in amusement. She finally went and did it, huh? Amadeus shook his head at the display. Sorry, just ignore that. Maria has a bad habit of kissing everything. He chuckled. It caused chaos at the palace. There were actually factions formed of people she had kissed and people she hadn't. He then frowned. No playwright would touch a story about the court which almost destroyed itself before the revolution. Senpei. Mash was busy shaking her master, who was still red in the face. Snap out of it. You guys don't do kisses? Marie asked in confusion as she surveyed the group. Her reply was a few chuckles and shakes of the head. No, we don't do that. Ash replied, still chuckling at the display. What about you, Jean? I do not. Jean blushed and recoiled. I'd only do that to someone I was going to marry. One moment. Ash interjected. The group turned to see him ignite a black flame in his hands and throw it at a group of soldiers to the south. The offending group instantly recoiled from the flames and sprinted away from them. What are you doing? Mash rounded on Ash, a look of pure shock on her face. Approaching a group with swords drawn is very rarely a sign of peace. Ash replied before turning to Amadeus, I see you were preparing yourself as well. Yes. Amadeus nodded. Heavily armed soldiers, and they most certainly weren't back from the front. Bandits, Jean frowned, still, it would have been better to capture them than simply scare them off. I'd trust they won't be back anytime soon. CU shrugged. From their perspective they approached the town only to see a guy chuck black fire at them. They'll probably avoid this place for a while. Dr. Ritska activated his communication link. How far are we from Lyon? You're only a couple miles away. Roman replied. You're gonna walk or fly in a carriage or something. I really don't fancy walking, but I don't think that Marie can carry all of us at once. I can take some on Hippo-kun. Astolfo waved and grinned, he can seat 3 people. So, Ritska hummed in thought as he looked everyone over, Mash, Assassin, Lancer and Sigward. We'll ride with Marie and Amadeus in the carriage. Jean and Ash will go with Astolfo. That's that then. Ash nodded, then grumbled, I hate flying. You're useless. Jalter scoffed at Ryder, I send you out to find them, and not several minutes after they escape you lose them. Storm was still disorientated from the attack. Ryder replied, contrary to your belief, he is not a specialist in tracking and neither am I. You should have been able to spot them. Chasing them down wouldn't have been necessary if you hadn't been gloating when they were vulnerable. Don't you? Jalter scowled and turned away, get out of my sight. I'll call on you when I need your help, for what little it has been worth. Ryder said nothing as he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. Why couldn't he have been inflicted with madness enhancement like a good little servant? Jalter scowled and shook her head, Giles. Said person quickly entered the room, yes, Jean. Contact Berserk Assassin. She turned to him, tell him he might expect company in Lyon. Ryder has proven incompetent, it may be that the Dragon Slayer survived. She sent a mental command, and 2 more servants entered the room. Soon, he and I will mobilize. Jalter continued, Berserker and Assassin, she huffed, this is getting complicated, I'm going to use your true names. Executioner Charles Henri Sanson and Gale, Slave Knight of the Gods. Mount your wyverns, I shall lead you. The hulking figure in the red cape said nothing as he turned away from Jalter and exited the room. Of course, Master. Sanson bowed with a sadistic smile on his face, only I am fit to take the head of the Queen. This is certainly the place. Ritsuka frowned as he viewed the city, the damaged outer walls and scorch marks made for a very telling story. Doctor, are you detecting any life signs? Mash inquired, only to be met with static. She frowned before turning to the other servants, sorry, it seems reception is bad here. Ritsuka nodded, we'll have to split into groups. He then turned to the servants, Mash, myself, Jean and Astolfo will take the east side of the city. Ash, Lancer and Assassin shall take the north and Sigward will go with Marie and Amadeus and search the west. He turned before he paused, oh, take these 2. He gave each of the group a small device. What is this? Ash asked as he held the object up for inspection, it was a smooth metal disc. Communication-based mystic code. Ritsuka replied, Da Vinci gave them to me, said to prepare for every possible situation, or something like that. Just press the button in the center. Right, sure, as you say. Were the various replies he received before the group split off into their various search parties. Ash, Cu and Kojiro wandered the empty streets of the town, occasionally they would encounter a stray zombie although between the servants they were easily dispatched. Something is wrong here, Ash muttered as he cast his glance around, it's far too quiet. Indeed. Kojiro frowned, while the French army would not be capable of fighting a horde of beasts and creatures, there are far too few here to pose a challenge. Maybe we just haven't encountered all of them. Cu shrugged, might be in hiding, or that Dragon Slayer isn't actually as injured as believed. Possible. Ash nodded, however it is rather peculiar for monsters like this to have an understanding of tactics. Unless they have already converged somewhere else. Kojiro offered with a thoughtful look on his face, perhaps these streets remain empty because our foes are already engaged elsewhere. One moment, Ash said, then took out the small disc which Ritsuka had given him. He pressed the small button in the center of the disc, it instantly projected a small screen similar to Roman's in front of the group. A few moments went by until the screen flickered and the faces of the other two groups appeared in front of them. Ash-san, Mash inquired, is something wrong? Have you found anything? Not as of yet, thus far there have been no signs of the Dragon Slayer. Ash then shook his head, what concerns me is that there have not been many signs of anything substantial. Merely a few undead but nothing to warrant the loss of a city. Quite so. Sigward chimed in, we have yet to encounter significant resistance. We haven't either. Ritska frowned. No signs of the Dragon Slayer and no signs of the enemy, he muttered then paused, wait, he squinted his eyes at something, we've got wyverns here. Mash, gee, the communication cut off. Ash looked around at the others, they nodded and immediately turned to head east. Only to run into several wyverns perched on the buildings. Ash materialized his sword, the closest wyvern to him immediately descended downwards towards him, its jaws lashed out at him. He quickly stepped to the side and swung his blade upwards, decapitating the beast. To his left, Lancer struck out with his spear straight through the lizard's skull and out the back of its head. Assassin was dancing around the beast, a sad smile on his face, while you certainly have wings, he lamented as he unsheathed his sword, you make for a rather poor swallow. His final sentence was punctuated by his nodashi gliding through the air as it split the wyvern's belly open, the beast screamed in pain before the blade separated its head from its neck. The group continued their mad dash east, quickly noticing that many of the other wyverns were quickly headed in that direction. Mash lashed out at a zombie which swiped at her, the sword being parried by her shield before she spun around and struck the creature in the temple with the side of her shield. The skull caving inwards and the zombie collapsing onto the floor. Beside her, Astolfo split another undead in half with a swing of his sword. He then paused as he stared at the corpse, should I apologize to Ash and Sigward for killing undead? He turned to Mash and Ritska with a curious expression, is it like killing family members or something? Worry about that later. Jean called out as she swirled her standard about and skewered another attacker, I very much doubt that Ash and Sigward would care about these undead, they would agree that we are doing them a kindness. I suppose. Astolfo shrugged as he went back to cutting down more zombies which approached him. Senpai. Mash called out in shock, Ritska turned to see a zombie mere feet from him. Instantly he scrambled back, it was unnecessary however as several crystalline shards impacted the creature's body and sent it to ground. Ritska turned to see Marie waving at him with a relieved smile on her face, Amadeus to her left was obliterating zombies with directed soundwaves while Sigward used brute strength to slice their bodies apart with his greatsword. We rushed over as soon as communication was cut out. Marie said as she approached the group, then looked around, where are the others? Ritska frowned. The northern group isn't back yet, truthfully I was expecting them before you. Have you tried the master servant link senpai? Mash asked. Ristuka shook his head. With so many servants, it's kind of hard to track which one I want to communicate with. I don't want to send a message to someone else by mistake. Master. Ritska turned to see Sigward nodding at him, the zombies have been dealt with. May their souls rest in peace. Jean intoned a small prayer for the deceased. Peace. The group heard a sickly voice call out to them, they turned to see a gangly figure with long-bladed claws and white mask covering half his face step into the street opposite them, did they desire peace? What a foolish thing to say. They have no peace in their souls, there is certainly none for us servants. This world has been frozen for years. Servant. Mash shouted out before she stood protectively in front of Ritska. Jean similarly readied herself as she stood to his side. Who are you? She asked as she pointed her standard at him, the other servants all prepared themselves as well. Correct. The figure gestured to Mash. Ah, my name, people call me Phantom of the Opera, he straightened himself as his visible eye narrowed on the group, by order of the Dragon Witch, this town is placed under my absolute AAARRRGGHHH. He was cut off and began shrieking in pain as a black fireball impacted his side. The Chaldea group blinked in surprise, they turned to see Ash, Kojira and Siyu rushing the man. Ash ran in first as the burning figure flailed around, he swung his sword downwards and quite literally disarmed the phantom of his bladed arm. Not stopping, Ash rushed past him. The berserk assassin had few moments to lament his lost limb before Kojira similarly ran past, his blade glided through the air as it split open the phantom's chest and his guts spilled to the ground. Kojira also rushed past as he joined Ash on the sidelines. Berserk assassin dropped to his knees, his remaining arm clutching his organs spilling from his chest, his life and pain being ended when Cu slid to a stop in front of him and thrust his lance through Assassin's heart. The servant remained frozen for a few moments before he faded away into golden particles. Ash and the other two nodded to each other before facing Ritska. Are you uninjured? Quote. Why yeah, Ritska dumbly replied, himself and the others still staring at the spot the enemy servant had been not moments ago. Good. Ash nodded. We feared the worst when we lost contact with you. It seems that the creatures of the city had rushed over to engage you and ran into us. It was then that Ritska noticed that the three servants were covered in filth and signs of battle. Are you guys alright? Ash tilted his head in surprise before he shared a look with Kojira and Cu. I believe we are unharmed, Master. Ritsuka let out a sigh of relief. Good. Lee. Ritsuka heard the crackling of the Chaldea communication hub. Soon after, Roman appeared looking rather panicked. We got through to you, at last. Doctor. Ritsuka blinked in surprise. What's wrong? You need to get out of there. Roman cut him off. We're picking up an ultra-class life form heading towards you. This is a far greater reading than the one the enemy rider had. His master's dragon. Sigward surmised with a frown behind his helmet. We can't leave without the dragon slayer. I'm also detecting 3 more servants alongside it. You need to get out of there now. But if what Ryder says was true, then we need the dragon slayer more than ever. Mash countered back, the group looking more and more restless than before. No. Roman continued to argue, no time for that. But if we leave the servant here, then all our efforts will be for nothing. Jean interjected. Master, your orders. Mash rounded on Ritska, a somewhat desperate look in her eyes. We find the dragon slayer. He said firmly as he locked eyes with her. We can't hope to match the dragon that the enemy servants have without him. He turned to the other servants, prepare to fight, even if we don't find them we're unlikely to outrun a dragon. Physician. Ash barked, have you found any signs of another servant with your contraptions? Roman blinked, then stared at a monitor to his left for a few moments, searching now. Aha, there's a faint reading in the castle in the center of the city. Roman, what the hell have you done to the desk? Another voice chimed in from just off the screen. Roman blinked and turned around. Director. He gasped. You're up. No time for that. I'm out of commission for only a few days and you turn the command center into a pigsty. She raged at him. He wilted slightly. What's going on with the Singularity team? No time to talk, Director. Ritska blurted out. We need to find a dragon slayer so we don't die in the next few minutes. Wait, what did you do? He cut off the connection and the group broke into a sprint towards the center of the city. You're gonna be getting shit for that later, you know that right? Cu smirked at Ritsuka as he jogged alongside the sprinting boy. Said boy's eyes widened in realization and he felt a sense of horror overtake him. The group burst through the castle. Ritsuka shouted into his communication device, Roman, which way? Down, was the answer he received. The group virtually flew down the stairway and past the rotting corpses of slain zombies and shattered skeletons. Mash was the first one into the room, and immediately had to block a strike aimed at bisecting her. One after another, a ragged voice drew the group to Mash's attacker, only to see a tanned man with long white hair staring at them. Bulky steel pauldrons covered his shoulders while his forearms had thick bracers around them. Beneath the armor is a simple black jumpsuit that exposed much of his physique, which included the wounds that covered his body along with what appeared to be a series of curses festering on his skin. Please wait. Jean rushed forwards. We mean you no harm. The servant turned towards her, his ragged breaths continuing. In any event, we've got a dragon and several servants incoming. Ritsuka drew the knight's attention to him. You're a dragon slayer, right? We need your help. A dragon, the knight muttered, then nodded. I see. So that's why I was summoned and attacked. We'll get you out of here. Mash said as she slung the knight's arm over her shoulder with Jean taking the other one as they carried him out of the castle cellar. Hurry up, master. Sigward shouted from outside, even we can sense the dragon approaching. I can see it. Ash pointed into the distance, and the rapidly approaching shape which was flapping huge wings. Behind his helmet Ash had only one thought. It's smaller than Madir. It wasn't smaller by much, but in Ash's mind he determined that it would at least make it easier to kill. Probably. The black dragon came to a stop above them, its large wings producing sizable gusts of wind which flattened the nearby houses and forced Ritsuka to take shelter behind Mash. I wondered what you were all doing here. The condescending voice of Jalter echoed out from above them, but it seems you've been going grave digging if that corpse you call a servant is any indication. Her grin widened and became maniacal. In that case, I'll allow you to join him. Fafnir, incinerate them all. Master, stay behind me. Mash shouted out as she rushed in front of the group. Jean rushed and stood next to her. I'll join you, Mash. Luminosite, Lord, Eternel. Chaldeas. The group were encompassed by a bright light moments before a torrent of dragon fire impacted their position. The ground surrounding them began to liquefy under the intense heat as fires began to spread amongst the remaining buildings. Whoa, Roman shouted out. This level of energy. Roman, damn it, what do you have them doing? Olga shouted in a panic. Are you having them fight dragons? Please, be quiet, Ritska pleaded as he covered his face in a vain attempt to shield himself from the heat. This is, Mash began to skate backwards slightly. I can't hold on much longer, Senpai. No, Ritska turned to see the knight standing back to his full height. You've done enough, my power is restored enough for this. He walked forwards, brandishing the large black greatsword in his hands. The fire died down. The group blinked in surprise as all of the dragon's attention was now on the knight, still walking forwards without worry. It's been a long time, evil dragon Fafnir. He said, his voice quiet and even weakened. It seemed to draw attention. If you have indeed been resurrected, then I shall return you to your slumber. He held his sword in front of him with two hands. Fafnir is shaking. Jalter muttered in disbelief, then her eyes went wide. That servant. Arise, my sword. The knight clicked the handle. In an instant a blue stream of energy was launched into the sky. Hear me. One who rules the blue sky. My name is Siegfried, he who once defeated thee. He shouted as he held his sword above his head, the light from the blade intensifying. Balmung. He swung the blade down, cleaving through the clouds in the air as it raced towards Fafnir. Fafnir, climb. Jalter shouted in a panic. The dragon screamed in affirmative as it scrambled away through the air. The blue light barely grazed its side but more than enough to elicit a scream of pain from the animal as its scales were scorched. Though it was still present, the dragon was clearly in no rush to attack the group. Still beating its wings fiercely in an effort to retreat, all the while the gene from atop its back cursed loudly into the sky. The newly named Siegfried staggered forwards after the blow, collapsing to the ground, using his sword as a crutch to prevent himself from keeling over. Sorry, he panted out, this is the best I can do. Let's get you out of here, Sigurd said as he slung Siegfried's arm over his shoulder and began carrying him away. We're retreating, guys, Ritska shouted out to the other servants. They followed him as they made a break for the outskirts of the town. However, Ritska couldn't help but shake the feeling that he was forgetting something important. What the heck is happening to my Chaldea? Oh right, the director was back. What are you doing fighting dragons? You third-rate hack. And she was mad at him. At least she was back to normal. And, yay, Olga's back. But we also get a glimpse of the other servants in this singularity. Gale, poor old man. Archon, Silver Knight. He isn't an OC character. He was actually the main character of a Dark Souls comic titled Age of Fire. It isn't considered canon, but I figured that it would be nice to have him in there. We'll do voice lines for the pair of them now. Gale, however, will be the voice lines for his Saber class. Considering that the Berserker class won't really have too much in the way of coherent voice lines. I will include Berserker Gale's stats though. His Saber stats will be added when he is Archon, Silver Knight, Servant, Saber, Strength, B+, Endurance, B+, Agility, D+, Mana, D, Luck, D, Noble Phantasm, B. The Black Knight, B. Anti-unit, self-modification. Blackens his armor and increases his physical stats for a brief period of time. Provides massive resistance against flames. Class skills. Riding. E. Magic resistance. C. Divinity. E. Race of Lords, although low-level Silver Knight. Personal skills. Miracles. D. Can only use low-level lightning-based miracles. Dragon Slayer, False B. Bestowed title by Gwyn, despite never having slain any dragons, gives him insight into how best to slay dragonkind. Summoning. Servant, Saber. I have answered your calling for a servant. How may this Silver Knight fulfill your commands? Dialogue 1. We have been idle too long, I request we head out at once. There must be foes to slay. Dialogue 2. Master and servant, You are my lord. I live only to obey your commands, whatever they may be. Dialogue 3. My helmet. The removal of a silver knight's helmet would disgrace them. Regardless, my face isn't worth looking at to begin with. Dialogue 4. If you have knights of the round table. They are knights. A diverse bunch, however there is versatility in their formation. I suppose they are the equivalent of Lord Gwyn's 4 knights. Dialogue 5. If you have ashen one. An undead. No, an unkindled. Is there a difference? Dialogue 6. If you have Pontiff Sullivan. A traitorous swine. You should beware of him, my lord. However, if this knave might prove useful, you may keep him. However, if the time ever arises that he may die, allow me to be his executioner. Dialogue 7. If you have Gwyndolin. This presence. Lord Gwyndolin, I beg your forgiveness. I was not there to save Lord Gwyn. If you have any words of reprimand, I will hear them and accept. Dialogue 8. If you have Lancer Artoria Alter, Stage 3. Ahem. Have you seen her? That knight on the horse with the divine air about her. Her armor is rather lacking, isn't it? Do I have an issue with it? Well, perhaps not an issue, rather, never mind. Dialogue 9. If you have Artoria Saber. A king, you say? I fear you have the gender wrong. Raised as a boy, how peculiar. Regardless, she may strive to be a perfect king all she likes. Lord Gwyn will still be the perfect ruler. Dialogue 10. If you have any demigods. One would rarely encounter lords or those touched by them, even in a Norlando. I myself only saw Lord Gwyn perhaps a couple times in the centuries I served. To see so many is jarring. Dialogue 11. If you have Ornstein. Sir Ornstein, the captain of the 4 knights. Here. If he is here, then you may trade my service for his. He is a far greater knight than I could ever hope to be. Dialogue 12. If you have Mordred. I dislike traitors. To be branded a knight of treachery, however it seems she has already suffered, and when I hear of her life, perhaps she was always destined for that moment. Either way, I shall overlook it, just this once. Dialogue 13. If you have Leonidas. He has offered me the opportunity to join in his training regime. I accepted. He is actually a very capable taskmaster. I know little of these Spartans, but if he was their king, they must have been fearsome warriors. Dialogue 14. If you have dragon-based servants. I find myself uncomfortable around them. I realize they are different to the dragons I fought, however it is perhaps my old nature. Fear not, I shall not slay them by accident, but do not ask me to spend time with them. Dialogue 15. If you have Nagao Kagatora. You there. Divine servant. This may be an odd request, but may you look at me with your eyes? Yes. Ah. Like that. Why are you backing away from me? Dialogue 16. If you have Nameless King. What is this traitorous knave doing here? This bastard betrayed his own father. Any punishment he had suffered will never be enough. Come here, knave. Face justice. Likes. I actually enjoyed drills. Keeping fit is an important part of being a silver knight. Hates. Things I hate. HMPH. Please do not call me dragon killer. I never slew any dragons. Traitors are another thing. To betray one's lord is an unacceptable offense. Wish for the Holy Grail. I am undeserving of wishes from such an item. Bond level 1. You fight well, my lord. It is good that you are honorable. Blonde level 2. You have proven your capabilities. I will continue to serve you for as long as I am needed. Blonde level 3. I am pleased with our progress. Our list of victories grow as does your wisdom, my lord. I hope you will continue down this path. Bond level 4. You are a true lord. Human you may be, you have the spirit of one. While you are no equal to Gwyn, you are respectable in your own right. Bond level 5. I thank you for having use for me, my lord. I failed my lord when me most needed me. I thank you for this second chance at service. I shall serve you with my whole being. Birthday. A birthday. You should celebrate, my lord. You will soon look as respectable as you sound. No, that wasn't an insult. During an event. It seems something is happening. Shall I prepare us to depart, my lord? First ascension. I feel stronger than before, how curious. Second ascension. That rejuvenating feeling again, it is rather pleasant. Third ascension. My armor, what's wrong with it? What do you mean? Why hasn't it changed? This is the armor of the Silver Knights. It is meant to be practical and never need an improvement. Fourth ascension. So, this is as strong as I will become. I shall endeavor to use this strength to protect you, my lord. Slave Knight Gale. Servant. Berserker. Strength. A+. Endurance. A. Agility. A. Mana. B. Luck. C. Noble Phantasm. B. Executioner's Greatsword. B. Wounds inflicted with this weapon can only be healed through magical means of rank A. Fulgur Pluvium. B. Anti-unit, max target. 10, max range, 0 to 15. Lightning Rain. Gale's energy explodes outwards with the projectiles seeking out targets and then calling down lightning. Class skills. Mad Enhancement. A. Magic Resistance. B. Personal Skills. Miracles. A. Battle Continuation. A+. Mystic Slayer. A+. Mana Burst, Flame. B. Summoning. I am the servant, Saber. Gale. I have come to act as your soldier. Dialogue 1. You may remain idle as long as you wish, master. It is not my place to act. Dialogue 2. Master and servant. Ha, 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 it has been many years since I heard such titles, although back then it was master and slave. Dialogue 3. I may be old, but I'm certainly more experienced than a great deal of other servants here. Do not worry yourself, little harm shall come to you while I live. Dialogue 4. If you have knights of the round table. Knights you say, and they are true ones too. Not like me, perhaps they would see it as an insult to bear the same title as them, although, they seem good enough folk. Dialogue 5. If you have Ashen one. I owe him a debt I may never repay, he did as I asked and more. Perhaps a story for another time. Dialogue 6. If you have Artoria. She came to me recently, you know. She said that she disliked the way I was referred to as a slave knight, and said it should only be a title given to those who are honorable. She said she would only refer to me as a proper knight should and declared me Sir Gale. It was an unnecessary kindness, but appreciated. Dialogue 7. If you have Ornstein. It is no surprise to see my former master here, he was straightforward with his tactics. Or rather, by the book's commander as you would say. I lost many friends under him. Dialogue 8. If you have divine spirits. I never encountered a true god before. Now they are everywhere, however these ones are different to those who resided in Orlando, they are far more involved in the affairs of humans, whether or not that is a welcome change, is yet to be decided. Dialogue 9. If you have Santa lilies. They keep calling me Santa Claus, I do not know who that is, they also seem to expect presents every time they see me. I give them wood carvings, they are often disappointed unless I give them what they want. Dialogue 10. If you have Mordred. She is rather willful, but there is talent there, it's buried deep. I find her company to be a welcome change to the others, however I do wish she would stop calling me Gramps. Dialogue 11. If you have Gwyndolin. There is nothing to be said. He will never acknowledge my existence because his father never did. Whether or not that is fine with me is irrelevant, I am used to it. Dialogue 12. If you have Nursery Rhyme. She's a rather soft-spoken young girl, she reminds me so much of dear little Arya, she's even taken to calling me Uncle Gale, she's a fragile little thing. Dialogue 13. If you have Jack the Ripper. An unfortunate soul, perhaps a culmination of the unfairness of the young, it matters not to me. I shall care for her, she deserves that much at least. Dialogue 14. If you have Kiera Sessioin. Refrain thyself from my presence, harlot. Go bewitch some other poor soul, leave our master be. Dialogue 15. If you have Senji Muramasa. I suppose we're both old men, yes, the young are far too eager to run head first into trouble, although I'm rather jealous of you, why? Look at you, I at least look my age. Likes. I don't particularly have any. Hates. Things I hate. I gave up on hating long ago, I simply never ran out of things to despise to simply ignored them. Wish for the Holy Grail. Wishes. No, it's not important. Bond level 1. You're doing well, however there is still much room to improve upon. Blonde level 2. You are quite the character for one so young. I shall do my best to aid you. Blonde level 3. My purpose in my last life was complete. I have no regrets, yet I thank you for giving me a new purpose. Bond level 4. You are a good person, you have a kind soul and I will admit it is a kindness I am unused to. Bond level 5. I am a slave knight. I was always meant to serve another, yet, to serve you, it is not a bad thing, I thank you for giving my title meaning beyond simple sacrifice. Birthday. A birthday, ah, yes, Those are supposed to be celebrated, aren't they? I offer my congratulations then. During an event, someone is kicking up a commotion outside, perhaps we should investigate. First ascension. I feel, perhaps younger. Maybe I am going hollow in my old age. Second ascension. No, I definitely feel younger. My thanks, I can move more freely now. Third ascension. I'm very close to being stronger still. Perhaps you would find your time better served aiding the more talented servants than an old man such as I. Fourth ascension. So, you decided to do it, did you? Very well, I shall try to live up to your hopes.